Hey everyone, my name is Brian Skinney from secretsofsushi.com, and in this video I'm going to show you guys how to make tempura shrimp. In this video I'm using 2630 brown shrimp caught off the Gulf of Mexico, and the shrimp don't have the heads attached but they still have the shells on. So the first thing we want to do is to peel the shrimp. I've found that the best way to peel shrimp is to start from the legs on the belly of the shrimp and start to peel them up and over the back, and then working your way from the front part of the tail down to the tip of the tail. Now, when making tempura shrimp, I find that it's really helpful to leave just a small portion of the tail attached. You can take the triangular part of the tail off, but leaving the two fins on actually gives you something to hold on to in the first few seconds of tempura frying shrimp. So I recommend leaving them on. After we've peeled all the shells off of our shrimp, now it's time to devein the shrimp. So to do that, you're just going to look at the back part of the shrimp, which you can identify by kind of looking towards the front end of the tail and trying to find where the vein is located. With some shrimp, it's a little bit easier to spot the vein because you'll see a little bit of shrimp poop right at the top. And so what you're going to do is just use a sharp knife and just make a small cut along the back of the shrimp. Then you can peel the skin back and remove the vein. So with this example, you can see that there actually is some poop in the vein of the shrimp. And once you've opened up the vein in all the shrimp, we're going to wash them all at the same time, just to make things a little bit easier. So as you can see, a lot of these shrimp do actually have some poop in the digestive tract of the shrimp itself. So now that we have opened up the vein of all the shrimp, now we're going to wash them under some cold water. Okay, now that we've rinsed all of our shrimp off and you can see there's no more veins in the back of the shrimp, now we need to pat them dry, try to remove as much water as possible before tempura frying them. Okay, now that our shrimp have been peeled, washed, deveined, and dried out, now we're ready to actually make our tempura batter. So what I've done is I've gotten some tempura batter mix, which looks just like flour does, and I've put half of that tempura powder onto a plate so that we can dust our shrimp in the tempura powder before we tempura fry them. And then the other half, I put it into a bowl. Now the key to making really good tempura is to use ice cold water. So I actually have a glass of water that I put into the freezer for a little while to make sure it's really cold but not quite frozen. And what I'm gonna do is just pour that water into the bowl, and I'm gonna mix it together using a small whisk. Now the goal here is to make sure that you've mixed up most of the powder, but you actually want to leave a few clumps in the tempura batter itself. So before we tempura fry our shrimp, we want to make sure that the shrimp actually straighten out. So normally when you cook shrimp, if you don't do anything special to it, what's going to happen is as the shrimp cooks, it's going to curl up into kind of like a crescent moon shape. And that's because there's a small tendon, so to speak, that pulls together that causes the shrimp to kind of curl. And so what we want to do is use a sharp knife and make a few small cuts along the belly of the tail of the shrimp. And so that way we can actually stretch the shrimp out a little bit, and this helps keep it straight as it's cooking. So what I'm going to do is use a knife and just make a couple of small incisions along the belly of the shrimp itself. You don't need to make these cuts very deep, and I wouldn't recommend cutting more than about halfway through the shrimp. So now you can see that I've made diagonal cuts along all of the bellies of the shrimp. So what I'm going to do now is actually flip the shrimp over, and I'm going to kind of press down and stretch it out. You should hear a little bit of a popping sound coming from the shrimp. So what this is doing is just making sure that the shrimp stay nice and straight, and it makes sure that the tendon doesn't start to curl the shrimp as it's cooking. Okay, so now that we have the shrimp all straightened out, we're ready to start deep frying. But before we actually batter all of our tempura shrimp, we want to make sure that the temperature of the oil is hot enough to actually start frying foods. So an easy way to test to see if your oil is hot enough to start frying foods is to use a bamboo skewer. So what you're going to do is set the tip of the bamboo skewer into the oil, and the bamboo skewer should start bubbling almost immediately. If it does, that's how you know that your oil is hot enough to actually fry food. If the skewer doesn't start bubbling within just a couple of seconds, then you should probably give it just a little bit more time to come up to a proper temperature. So what I'm gonna do is grab one tempura shrimp, kind of by the tip of the tail, and I'm just going to dust it in the tempura flour. Next, I'm gonna pick up my bowl of tempura batter, and then I'm going to coat the piece of shrimp. Then I'm gonna slowly dip the shrimp into the oil and hold on to the tail for just a second, just to make sure that the shrimp doesn't immediately sink down to the bottom of the pot and stick to the base of the pot. So then we're going to repeat that same process for all the shrimp that you want to tempura fry. As the shrimp are frying, you want to make sure that you have a plate with a couple of paper towels on it so that when you pull the shrimp out, you can set them on the plate to rest. It's also important to keep in mind that once you pull the shrimp out of the oil, it actually is still at a very high temperature, so that it's going to continue the cooking process a little bit. So I'm going to use a set of cooking chopsticks to remove the shrimp from the oil, but you could easily use a set of tongs at home if that's what you have readily available. The shrimp only need a couple of minutes to cook, so make sure you keep an eye on them because it's very easy to overcook shrimp. When you lift shrimp out of the oil, it should have kind of a crunchy texture to it, and that's how you know that the outside batter has finished its cooking process. And when you pull it out, you want to make sure that it's kind of still a light yellow color and not really like a deep golden brown yet, because as the shrimp cools on the plate with a paper towel, the color is going to darken a little bit because that cooking process is still going. One thing that's important to note when deep frying something at home is that you want to make sure that you are constantly checking the temperature of the oil, because as you put cold food, and especially cold tempura batter, into the oil, you're going to lower the temperature just a little bit. So if you cook, let's say 4 to 6 shrimp, you're going to lower the temperature enough to where it warrants checking again, because what you don't want to do is have the deep fryer oil drop so low, because it's going to take longer to cook the food, and the food's actually going to absorb more oil, and it's going to taste more like fryer oil than it will crispy tempura. Another tip when tempura frying shrimp at home is to, while holding on to the tail, dip the fatter end of the tail into the oil and kind of swish it around the oil just a little bit for maybe a second or two to help prevent the shrimp from sticking to the bottom of the pot. So after our tempura shrimp is done frying, you can see that the color of the tempura shrimp has actually darkened a little bit, and that's because the cooking process has slowed down and has really given it that golden brown color. So as you can see, the tempura shrimp do actually resemble a lot like what you would see in a Japanese restaurant. So when you use this in your sushi rolls, just make sure that you remove this part of the tail before putting it into the roll itself. Sometimes, if the tempura coating is too thick to be used inside of a roll, you can take a knife and cut it lengthwise. And to help make the ingredients more consistent on the inside of the rolls, you can set the tapered part of the tail after it's been cut in half and overlap it, so that you get more of a consistent thickness of the tempura shrimp inside the roll. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you liked it, be sure to give it a thumbs up down below, and if you want to see more videos on how to make sushi at home, click on the subscribe button. My name is Brian Skinner from secrettosushi.com, and thank you for watching.